Live on Facebook. 6 people have entered the waiting room. I'm getting ready to start letting everyone in. As soon as I'm sure we're good here. Beautiful. Okay, hold on. Let me just make sure.
We're going to start promptly at 7 or give a couple minutes?
We'll give it a few minutes when we get in, but I just wanted to make sure everything was up and looking. Okay, very good. We're in. All right, we're on Facebook. Let me get back over to Zoom. I'm going to start letting people in. Let me just let Professor Diamond in. There we go. Professor Diamond's in. How you doing, Professor Diamond?
Oh, good evening.
We are live on Facebook, and I'm getting ready to allow all of the people in, and we are recording.
Let me close this window next to me.
Very good. Okay, excellent. All right. Let me share this. It's where's live stream? More options. Share a page. Share it here. All right. Let's share to a page. We're going to share it here. Okay. Lower this down.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for sending me some example questions. I don't believe we'll be able to touch on half of them, just as a heads up. But depending on how y'all feel this goes, perhaps we can do a follow-up to cover any information we don't cover this time. Gentlemen, oh, have folks joined the group, right, outside of the speakers?
Greetings to everyone. We'll be getting started in just a moment. I do ask that when you come in, please mute your microphone so that we don't get any background noise. And if I catch it that anyone hasn't noticed that they're giving background noise, I'll just mute you. So if you're in the audience and you do get muted, that's the reason why. Please don't take any offense. We'll be getting started momentarily. We'll deal with this later. Yes. All right. good. We're at about 19 people. Minute. And I wanted to share. That's what I wanted to do. Okay.
Where'd it go?
Everyone. Okay. All right, excellent. All right. I think everyone's here that's supposed to be here. Very good. All right, excellent. Are we ready to go, sir? All right. So, Wuni Nakan, Nitampa Kanatawamag, that is to say, good evening, friends and family. My name is Raymond Two Hawks Watson. I am CEO and founder of the Providence Cultural Equity Initiative, and PCEI is the host of this year's 11th annual New England Native American Culture Week. Just for a little bit of background, and I'm going to ask someone to mute their microphone. We're getting a little bit of background feedback. For a little bit of background on PCEI, we are a nonprofit based in Providence, Rhode Island, whose mission is to steward and ambassador Rhode Island's cultural sector and economy. In that regard, the 11th annual New England Native American Culture Week is a part of an annual series of cultural and educational events geared towards educating the general public about the specific cultures, narratives, and historical experiences of the nations that are aboriginal to the lands now known as New England. The initiative started in partnership with Rhode Island College under the leadership of former President Nancy Cariulo and my good friend and colleague Jen Giroux. And the purpose was that we often found that, especially here in New England, when you spoke about American Indian cultures, when you spoke about American Indian music, when you spoke about American Indian anything, most people had a tendency to automatically think about our family out in the Northern Plains. And of course, we honor and respect that very beautiful and, just well-renowned and well-respected culture that they have out there in the Northern Plains, and it's always love. But we have a very interesting and important story to tell here in the New England region as well. And we thought that being that we were from this region, it was important that we be the ones to take lead on that. So we are here now in our 11th year. And so excited. I just want to share with you just what some of the programming has been thus far this week. On Monday, we had a fantastic dialogue with Clan Mother Sharan Whitefawn Piper of the Golden Hill Pogussets out of the areas you would now know as Bridgeport, Connecticut. For those who may not be aware, the Golden Hill Pogussets have the oldest standing reservation since Anglo-American contact, going back to right after the war, Pequot Wars of 1637, 1638. So it was fantastic to hear from the Clan Mother and the ongoing thriving and overcoming of challenges that the Golden Hill Pogusset have been involved in. You can see that YouTube link on the PCEI Facebook page as well as on the PCEI YouTube page as well. So please check that out if you can. Yesterday afternoon, in collaboration with the American Indian Law Students Association from the Roger Williams University School of Law, we held a panel discussion entitled RWU Are on Indian Land, which featured the Sagamore of the Pokanoket Nation, Dr. Taino Palermo, who is president of the American Indian Law Students Association, and myself, just sharing some of the history and background and future aspirations that we have for American Indian studies here in this lands, and also celebrating the Aboriginal history of these lands. And of course, we are here tonight for the culmination of our week's events, fantastic discussion entitled First Contact Nations and the Doctrine of Discovery. So just want to thank you all on behalf of the Providence Cultural Equity Initiative and our sponsors, the Federation of Aboriginal Nations of the Americas, the Institute for Social Cohesion, and the American Indian Law Students Association at the Roger Williams University School of Law for being here to support our event. We hope you have enjoyed thus far if you have been able to attend, and we hope that you will definitely enjoy this evening's discussion. Now, with no further ado, I would like to turn the conversation over to our moderator for this evening, Mr. Jonathan Globe Lewis, who is the director for the Institute of Social Cohesion. And Globe, it is my great honor and pleasure to turn the microphone over to you, sir.
Well, thank you very much for your leadership, Mr. Watson, and for carrying this through for 11 years and giving us this opportunity to highlight such an important information. I will not spend much time on myself. I'd like to jump right into it because we have a lot to discuss. Today, we are fortunate to have two distinguished chiefs and a distinguished legal scholar along with us to help us understand the importance of the doctrine of discovery, as well as understanding a little bit about First Nations contact. I'd like to start with introducing Chief Sachem Dari Larry Fisher, traditionally known as Wampanoag. Wampatuck is a hereditary sachem of the Massachusetts, Massachusetts Indian Nation, and has served as an intergovernmental ambassador delegate to the United Nations Permanent on Indigenous Issues, representing many tribes and ongoing conflict. He's an adjunct professor in the School of Functional Medicine at Kingdom College of Natural Health, a tribal designated school for choice. He has attended 2 years of nation building at Harvard Kennedy School of Government and has lectured on topics of reserving rights to tribal court jurisdiction as non-federally acknowledged tribal nations. Sachem Fisher has lectured on Indigenous issues at Roger Williams University, Harvard, Yale, and Boston College. He is also a substance disorder counselor and recovery coach, and currently finishing his first book called A Tribal Applied Functional Medicine Approach to Addiction. Thank you very much for joining us. Would you mind just waving so folks can see you? Next, we're fortunate enough to have Priest King, hereditary paramount chief of the Uchi Nation. Priest King Langley is a highly sought after leader, authority in forensics, genealogy, and racial classification of American Indians during Indian slavery in America. He, as paramount chief, Priest King of the Savannah River Band Uchi Indian Nation, has band's presence in America, along with its rich history, has been well documented. Priest King Langley has his electronic engineering degree from DeVry Institute. And we're very happy to have you here with us today, sir. Thank you very much. Lastly, we have Dr. James D. Diamond. He is the Dean of Academic Affairs and a member of the faculty of National Tribal Trial College. He's a former director of the Tribal Justice Clinic at the James E. Rogers College of Law and a professor at the University of Arizona. He holds a JD from Brooklyn College Law and from the State University of New York and Alabama Rockefeller School of Government. Diamond has admitted to practicing law in 3 tribal courts, 3 states, and numerous federal courts, including the United States Supreme Court. Thank you very much for being here with us this evening. And if it's all right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start with opening statements from these individuals. Then we have some additional questions that we're going to ask them, and then turn to the audience to field your questions as well. Dr. Diamond, would you mind starting with your opening statement, and we'll go from there? I'd like to start with Dr. Diamond because of his legal background, and if that's all right with folks.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Globe, and for that introduction. And I'm very honored and pleased to join this prestigious panel with Station Fisher and Chief Langley. It's my honor to be here today. So our subject is the doctrine of discovery and First Contact Nations. And so let me talk about this doctrine. I heard about it much of my life and didn't really know what it was or its significance until I started studying Indian law. But the doctrine of discovery, and by the way, it's not just the law in the United States, it's international law all over the world. Doctrine of discovery ends up being a doctrine about Indian land title here in the United States. But I don't want to start with the end. Let's start with the beginning. Doctrine of discovery has its roots in medieval times, medieval period, when the Catholic Church wanted to impose Christianity on the world by military force. And so what you got was a coordinated approach to doing so, to making Christianity, indoctrinating the entire world with Christianity by force. And so the popes issued these decrees called papal bulls. The popes issued decrees telling the kings and queens and the knights to go out and explore, and wherever you found non-Christians, convert them to Christianity by whatever means possible. And while you're doing that, take their villages, occupy their villages, do whatever you have to do to convert them to Christianity. The kings followed suit. They were interested in natural resources, in gold, in water, timber, etc. So they sent out explorers throughout the quote unquote explorers throughout the world. And the explorers brought back, notions of inferior peoples, people who, didn't wear European clothing, didn't act in a European way of living, didn't go to a European church. And so the church said to the kings, seize these lands. The explorers, and of course in this part of the world, like Verrazano and Hudson and Cabot, initially had favorable responses and approaches to the peoples that they met, but treated them as inferior, as savages, and so they took the papal bulls, and by virtue of the order of the popes, conquered peoples they thought to be inferior, conquered, kidnapped, raped, killed people that they came upon who they thought to be inferior. Well, this went on for many hundreds of years. And then when the United States became a nation, the matter came to the U.S. Supreme Court, what to do with Indian lands. And the United States Supreme Court cited the doctrine of discovery and this whole rationale of the church and the papal bulls and the inferiority of the savages. The U.S. Supreme Court cited this as the rationale for U.S. control over indigenous peoples. And it became the law of the land. The doctrine of discovery in a case called Johnson versus McIntosh, the United States Supreme Court cited the doctrine of discovery as the rationale for why the Indians are inferior, why they could be treated as inferior, and why they had no right to ownership of land. They could only occupy it to the extent the conqueror didn't have another need for it. The doctrine of discovery was then imported this American invention, imported all over the world, everywhere where there was colonization. And so church-based desire to convert the world to Christianity by military force became the law of the land in the United States and, in fact, the world. And that's an opening statement on this doctrine that, it's kind of hard to believe that this is the basis for U.S. law, inferiority of peoples who were occupying a land because they didn't act like Europeans.
Thank you very much for that opening statement. Like you said, that is a lot.
Yeah. A lot to unpack.
So based on their clothing and practices and traditions, they were viewed as less than. And
yes, because they weren't European. They were infidels. They didn't go to church. They didn't wear European clothing. They didn't study European art and literature, and so they were viewed as savage, analogous to animals, and therefore could be conquered.
Thank you very much, Dr. Diamond. Chief Wampatuck, would you mind being our next speaker and sharing your perspective, given that your people were some of the earliest impacted by this? Would you mind unmuting yourself, Chief? There we go.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, and please feel free to take your time, 10, 15 minutes for your statement if you'd like.
Sure, not a problem. I'm going to go ahead and address you all first in my language. I'm honored to be here. Akuni to everyone here on the panel and those who are viewing today. Wuni Nakan, Nutasuis Wampamiquin, Nutasuis Wampatuk, Nitamas Matakisit, Nitamas Massachusetts, Nitamas Sionki Tigag, Kotirika. Tabatni Nitampwag. So thank you all for having me here. My traditional name is Wampamiquin. It was given to me by Darrell Black Eagle Jameson of the Pecassid tribe of the Pokanoket Nation when I was about 17 years old. I bear that name, White Feather. It represents the eagle's tail. Without the bald eagle's tail, he has no flight for direction for his community or for his own people. So today I represent that leadership and that flight for my people. I come from the land which is known as the Massachusetts people. The Commonwealth today of Massachusetts, the state bears its name and derives its name from our nation. But I'm happy to be here. I thank you all. Thank you, Nisu Wushuunag, for having me today. I'm honored to be here with James Diamond, yourself, and also with King Langley as well. So thank you all for having me. I wanted to first start off by just my regards, first and foremost, to the Taino Arawak people, who were indeed actually the first contact people who really suffered at the hands of this discovery. Contacted in 1492, as we know it, and my family wasn't contacted until the 1600s by the English settlers. But this is one conversation I'm very thankful to be in today, because I think that we also bring a different perspective and a different viewpoint on the doctrine of discovery. And I think the question that's really posed here was, did the doctrine of discovery actually fulfill its obligation in impacting and furthering oppression upon Eastern tribes? My family was contacted by the Puritans who fled away from the King of England first. Then they came to the Massachusetts territory to colonize the Massachusetts people. They came here by an accident. They weren't trying to come here. They got caught up and went the wrong direction and ended up here. Did they come here with force? They came here definitely prepared with militarized gear and weapons, not knowing where they were going. But when they got here, they kind of went in the opposite direction of their authority, which was the King of England. So I think the conversation from our perspective of the doctrine of discovery is, do we really fall under the jurisdiction of it? And that's the questions and what I wanted to bring to this panel today as well. So I thank you all for having me. Again, Tabani, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief. Appreciate that. Priest King Langley, thank you very much for being here with us. And I've had some times learning from you, and I'm very excited to hear what you have to say, given your breadth of this understanding and the magnitude of your truth. Thank you very much for finding time for us today.
No, you're welcome. I give you guys joy from the Yuchi people of the Savannah River between Georgia and South Carolina. Our first experiences with the Spanish in 1520, when Elian came down. And when he came down, he brought 300 Africans with him, and there was a revolt. And those Africans went to live among the Shakur people found today, which is called Palachicola, which is old Allendale County today. So that's one of the earliest experience of escaped Africans uniting with the natives and creating a united force. So my thing with history and the doctrine of discovery is that there's so much prejudice against Native Americans who share African ancestry. And that's one of the things I tend to hone in on to try and educate people. So for the longest time, different laws that they have, making people who are mixed race just one thing just doesn't fit with me. So I try to educate on that aspect. There are laws that many people don't know. Most people don't know that slavery didn't end in South Carolina until 1908. So Native Americans being the first to be enslaved and still being enslaved in South Carolina until 1908, that's a total game changer, but people don't know the history.
Chief Langley, your microphone was coming in and out a bit. We're not sure what the situation
final
was.
state.
Yeah, I think we didn't hear your final statement, sir.
I said I'll touch more on that later in the conversation.
Well, we're in the conversation. you brought up Africans and Indians, and how they were all forced to fit into one category.
Yeah.
Would you explain Negro law in South Carolina for us?
South Carolina Negro law was a pattern that came into existence in around 1702. A lot of people don't know that Native Americans who were free or had any agreements with the government remained Indian. Those that were enslaved became Negro, but a lot of people don't understand that Negro in that time just meant slave. So you lost your identity. Whether you were African, whether you were Indian, East India Indian, or whether you were some European or Scottish and German and Irish descent, you were just a Negro. And so when folks don't understand that, and now coming into play today, so you have Native Americans with African ancestry, then you have Africans with Native American ancestry, but I take the approach from being a Native American with African ancestry. So I'm Native American first. So most people don't understand these things. So if you take this Negro law that came into play, free Africans never became Negroes, and that's just justify what I'm saying. So now when you go back up hundreds of years, and these Native Americans with African ancestry, and they're coming out of slavery and they want to go back to their families, these laws are saying, no, you just a Negro, you just have total African blood. So if you look at the 1930 census, the 1930 census says that you are Negro or Black and American Indian ancestry, you are just Black. But if you are European and Native American, you're a Native American. So these type laws that came into play is why we have all of the prejudice in Indian country, as we have it today. So I take on those issues and try to give people a clear understanding of what's going on with these things.
Thank you very much, Chief. Appreciate that. Yes, please, Dr. Langley. I mean, Dr. Diamond. Yeah. Oh, Chief.
Yes, sir.
No,
Yeah, I just wanted to make one quick comment, Globe, that it's, so obvious from just the first, few minutes here, and comments from it's so obvious from the comments of Chief Fisher and Chief Langley that we make this horrible mistake of overgeneralizing about Native Americans or American Indians, because it's so much more complex than that, and you can't treat all Native Americans or American Indians the same, because all of the peoples, have different backgrounds and histories, and have been treated differently, whether it was from the British or the French or the Spanish, or the U.S. And so, but we make this mistake all the time, overgeneralizing, and it's, you can't do that. We shouldn't do that. Certainly not in this conversation. It's already apparent from the first few minutes how complex this is. And so, unfortunately, when the U.S. deals with Indian tribes, which is the only way they know how to do it, is by dealing with tribes they quote unquote recognize. They do the same generalizations, and they make these sweeping generalizations, and they impose doctrines of law in a sweeping fashion, like they did in the doctrine of discovery. But one size does not fit all, obviously.
I think it's a great danger when they do that, and that's just another means of eliminating a certain number of American Indians from the system. I prefer not to deal with federal recognition and the way they have designed this system by creating a heritage by law, which creates a serious problem. Because by heritage, they're not. And as a result of that, I found through my research over the years that there are many, many tribes that are state recognized, and some might be federal. The tribes maybe exist, but those people are not the people from that ethnic group. That's just heritage robbery. I take issues with things but I stay within my lane and stay with the history of my people. Another thing we need to deal with is that not all Native Americans came through the Bering Strait. So if they can accept the fact that some Asians, Native Americans are descended from Asians, some are descended from Turks. So what's the issue of some Native Americans being descendants of ancient Africans thousands of years ago that were in the Southeast?
mm-hmm.
This is the way the one drop blood rule. It's another form of racism against Native Americans.
Chief Wampatuck, would you mind chiming in, given your experience in fighting for your tribe as well as many other tribes through the UN? What would you like to share about what we're talking about right now?
Fighting for the Matakeesit tribe has been quite the challenge. And the way that we see it from the Matakeesit perspective, our own relativity perspective on this, is that, the framework, the normal framework that has been developed or that has been used almost like the fascism of developmental nation building is what I like to refer to it as. Really, it's been one that's not it's been one tailored as a one size fits all, but truly it is not. Each tribal nation needs to be individually tailored in such a way that it is culturally sensitive and competent to the developments of its past history, its midway history, and then also its future history. You know, for an example, you know, we can look at treaties, right? And we can look at tribes who have built relationships, who are, you know, Midwest, out West tribes that have built relationships. Most of their relationships were started with the US federal government. When you're talking about Matakeesit, our relation started with the Crown. You know, people look at Aboriginal title. You know, they say, well, what's the difference between Aboriginal title and what's the difference between treaty? Really, it's like a trick question. You know, Aboriginal title, it predated the US government and its structural system, you know, but at the same time, it still makes it a treaty issue based off of its relationship with another foreign nation, you know? So again, I see it as, you know, it has to be individually tailored to each tribal nation to move it forward, you know, for nation building purposes.
Globe, if I could just address just one point about treaties. Very interestingly, Chief Fisher talks about treaties. It's true. You know, treaties in the U.S. and other states are formed, you know, between Native nations and the colonizing governments. But interestingly enough, in the U.S., the U.S. Supreme Court actually relied upon the doctrine of discovery again to break treaties. And the U.S. Supreme Court, in a case called Lone Wolf versus Hitchcock, said, because we conquered you, whether that's true or not, because we conquered you, you are, you know, you don't have complete sovereignty, they said, and we can, you know, we can break these treaties because we need the land. And so the doctrine of discovery is the foundation of the entire relationship in the United States between the U.S. government and the indigenous peoples. And I'm telling you that it's cited all over the world, in, you know, anywhere where there's a colonizing history, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, etc. But the doctrine of discovery was the foundation for breaking treaties as well in the U.S. We always contemplated that we could break these treaties because your rights are not full, complete sovereigns. I don't say that this is a history that I'm proud of in this country, but the doctrine was used again to break promises to indigenous peoples.
So it's used to take it, to get you to sign something, and then to take it back again.
Indeed. The doctrine of discovery, you might be surprised at this, but the doctrine of discovery is still the law today. The doctrine of discovery was cited by the U.S. Supreme Court most recently in 2005. We are not talking, although its origins are medieval, this is not ancient history. This is the law today in the United States, and was cited by the U.S. The doctrine of discovery is cited by the U.S. Supreme Court in 2005 in all of our lifetimes.
You know, I'd like to add.
Please.
I'd like to add to that. You know, everything has developed in this country. You know, it seems that everything except for laws that work in favor with free, prior, informed consent of indigenous governancy has been developed in the favor of the continued development of all sustainability of American culture, right? So you have, you know, in order for documents to be valid in any court of law, whether it was a general court in England, whether it was, you know, the US Congress, federal court, Supreme Court, you know, there has to be a two-way consensuation, a consensual agreement between two, right? That's what makes treaties valid. That's what makes Aboriginal titles valid, right? That's what makes, titles to land valid. That's what makes life insurance policies today valid. That's what makes a marriage valid. So when we're talking about the doctrine of discovery, and you're talking about even, a Roman Catholic Vatican, right? That possibly never even reached definitely the shores of Massachusetts, because there's no history or documentation of that. There's documentation of settlers who broke off from the king's authority, who came over to try to further suppress us using their own doctrine, which was a wild card doctrine, which was, we're just going to convert you into Christianity and create these praying towns. You see, but even when John Eliot came over here, he already saw the Indians praying. But the fact that, there was no signed agreement on the doctrine of discovery, and then following the doctrine of discovery, when England was a successor of some of the Roman Vatican Empire, the king, like for example, in 1680, or 1608, you got King William and Mary. They had rescinded all land claims from 1633 to 1702 in Massachusetts and sent their own people packing. The charter of Massachusetts Bay Colony was revoked in the 1600s because they were violating the land claims of the kings. So what I like to point out is that we also have to acknowledge that there was a group of wild card players that were involved of the taking of native lands. It was not just this whole doctrine of discovery. This doctrine of discovery did not have power everywhere and on everybody's lands. This is why Aboriginal titles still, as treaties, have to be upheld at the highest court of the law. So if the doctrine of discovery was that powerful, then why are treaties still being acknowledged in the court of law today?
And so I hear Dr. Diamond saying, well, I hear Chief Fisher saying that treaties still hold their power today. I hear Dr. Diamond talk about how the doctrine of discovery still is the law of the land today. Chief Priest King Langley, some of the finest people I know are American Indian and far from savagery. Are they still saying that American Indians and Aboriginal people are still savages?
They may want to claim that by law, but my family and I took a step back on a few things. One of my ancestors met with King George III. So he was king of Palachicola. So we did some research, and took me about a year of doing this research. So we started looking into heritage and nobility law. So when you...
Would you break that down a little bit? I'm not sure if everybody knows what nobility law is.
Nobility is natural law of the land. So if you from a family line of royalty or kings or queens during this time of conquering, and when they conquered, you got people who were enslaved and you got people who was in exile, and many people were in exile within their own lands. So after research, we found out that after the American Revolution, we were exiled because England had a whole lot of information on my family. So what I did after that, I got knighted.
You say it so nonchalantly, sir.
Yeah, so about a year ago, so when I realized, so when I got knighted, and that allowed me to get into some doors I wasn't able to get in before, and to network with some people I wouldn't normally network before, I just came out of exile. Because a sovereign government of a noble people, even though they're in exile, they still rule. You just have to reclaim.
I see.
It. Then I went and dealt with other foreign governments outside of the United States and signed treaties of commerce and trade. They acknowledged me. I'm not going to sit and wait for this government to do anything because I don't trust them from that aspect anymore. Just don't from that aspect of things. I think we sit around and we wait, and there's so much prejudice in the state recognition process. There's so much prejudice in the federal recognition process. And when I look around, I see card-carrying Europeans claiming they are Indian and they pulling out a card. They got a little bit of mockery. So you've already created the doctrine of discovery. You got that side of the house. Now you're going to turn around and play on the heritage side of the house. I'm not going to play that game, so we just did things our way, and it's working for us right now.
As we just go ahead, Dr. Diamond, please.
No, I agree with both Chief Fisher and Chief Langley that first, if you have treaties, that you should, do everything, continue to honor them and treat them as if they're valid. And in fact, they're valid and should be valid. And I agree with Chief Langley that, that it's a good idea to go out and make new treaties and be creative, and don't wait for someone to, tell you you're recognized, you have an indigenous inherent sovereignty, and exercise it. I completely agree. And it's time to revisit this doctrine of discovery. I do want to address something that was said. I think, Globe, you asked Chief Langley if they are treated as savages or referred to as savages. They don't say that anymore. That's not what the Western courts say. But they rely on the court cases that did. So they don't say that the Native nations are savages. They're not going to say that anymore. But they said it, in the 1700s, and they said it in the 1800s, and they continue to cite those cases and rely on those cases that did say it without repudiating it. So you can't cite the doctrine of discovery in 2005 in an Oneida case, and treat it as if it's valid without addressing its inherent racism.
That's right.
So, yeah, so they don't come out and say it anymore because that would not be tolerated. But on the other hand, they rely upon the established law and the established rules and the cases. And they rely upon the cases to this day without repudiating the doctrine of discovery and the notions of racial inferiority that it was based on.
This just sounds like a big bully who's coming in and speaking a language and holding you accountable to a law or that's written in a language that you didn't even understand at the very beginning. And once you learn their language and maintain your own, they still won't give you the respect that you do. Oh, Wampatuck, what you must have seen some victories throughout your life, or what is it that pushes you to keep going, bro? It seems very relentless, the effort that's been put into this cultural and ethnic genocide. What pushes you, if you don't mind?
Sure, I think that's a wonderful question to ask. One thing that I want people and the viewers really, in the educational institutions to remember in Indian country is that, the Eastern tribes here, we were the first contact tribes. The condition of first contact had informed legal interpretations, by setting the immediate standards, for appreciation of well-established indigenous systems here. Eastern tribes, we actually traveled from England to Massachusetts, England to New York, England to Connecticut, England to Rhode Island, and really we are responsible for the case set precedent in all English law as a result of it today. We are the first ones to set precedent in English law today. So when we think about that, and when I say that, it's almost like sovereignty. People can ask the question, well, what is sovereignty, right? Well, and sovereignty is an inherent right. Well, what is jurisdiction? Well, jurisdiction is assumed in a court of law that protects the inherent right of the sovereignty. So the reason why I say that is to say, this is an inherent obligation from my ancestors. I have an ancestor by the name of Josias Wampatuck in 1664. He set up one of the first ever common law, English law doctrines, constrictive covenants, a restrictive covenant to save the land and for it to be never estranged from Indian ownership, but to be held in perpetuity forever. So when I read case laws that happen throughout the whole country of Indian country, I know that the first contact tribes were here. And when we ran back and forth to England, we were setting case law precedent in England and inside of Plymouth Colony Court that was acting and representing as the authority of the king to the lands here. So for me, it's an inherent obligation. This is why I don't stop. I can't stop. This is part of the identity and culture of the Matakeesit people today.
But Globe, I think the very fact of what's happening here, and what's happening in Rhode Island, what's happening in Massachusetts, what's happening down south with with the Uchi, what's happening, the fact that the persistence and the insistence on indigenous rights and the regardless of the history and colonization, what's happening here is miraculous and fabulous. And yes, there are victories. It's not all depressing history. There are victories throughout the world. And I think that we're just now, only in the last 10 years, beginning to use international law like Chief Sachem Fisher is doing, at the UN on the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. This is modern. This just happened like yesterday. And so this new process to me is very optimistic and positive, but there have been victories around the world. The Awastini of Nicaragua won a huge victory in the Inter-American Court. The Maori in New Zealand won a huge victory in the Maori Council case. Up in Canada, the Hulkaminam Treaty Group won a big victory in the Supreme Court of Canada. Here in the U.S., indigenous peoples are going to save the planet. They're managing our natural resources much better than the Americans ever did. Are recognizing the importance and the harmony between humans and the rest of the planet. And they are, in fact, managing natural resources as a result of successful cases enforcing treaties and treaty rights in hunting and fishing and management of resources. So I'm optimistic. I don't think that we should dwell on medieval history, and this doctrine should in fact be repudiated, and we should move on into the future and restore indigenous rights and sovereignty.
One of my favorite comics, if y'all don't mind for a moment, was G.I. Joe. And in at the end of that cartoon, they would say, knowing is half the battle. Knowing all this is great, but like you were just saying, how do we apply it to current situations so that we can reconcile, heal, make progress? Try to, I don't know if folks could ever do right by the wrongs that were conducted, but how do we apply this information today? And Priest King Langley, would you mind responding to that? After you respond, sir, I have one more question, then we're going to turn to some of the audience questions.
I think we have to start thinking outside the box, learn from the past, understand that federal or state recognition doesn't acknowledge who I am. I know who I am, know who my family is. I take it from that perspective. I'm not looking for a handout. I don't want anything other than to be left alone, embrace my heritage, follow the path that my ancestors are guiding me on, for myself, my family, my community. I'm not going to ask them for anything. It's a waste of time. They can tie you up in court for years. I think the federal recognition process is laughable. Look at the number of people who spend millions of dollars in 25 and 30 years. For what? I'm 54. I don't have time to waste.
That's right.
Just do it my way, keep it moving, do it the right way, and leave it at that. But I think our history, because the way colonial Europeans have written history, they've given us a raw deal because they have written it their way. People under the impression that there wasn't any empires here, there wasn't any cities here. Everybody was living in huts. These societies was very advanced. Advanced enough, they were dealing with other countries. They've been traveling across the Atlantic for a very long time. So that history, we just have to take in our own hands and embrace and tell our story our way, but be truthful in the things that you say.
That's right.
And that's what I do. And we keep, I'm a little bitter, but am I harsh and holding them accountable to certain things you just don't have control of them all. So for me to go forward, just have to do it the best way and go forward. I don't need them to tell me when I can embrace my ancestors. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to waste my time with it.
Thank you, Chief. Now, I do a lot of work with students and schools, and the confidence that I see in the two chiefs here by knowing who they are, knowing their history, we don't see that in our kids today. They learn a lot of history that's not accurate and presents one as greater than, another as less than. And this is a selfish question. I'm currently working with a superintendent and a director of curriculum for a very white community. And they truly believe that they need to make change. Like, they're done talking about Columbus as the first one who discovered here. They understand that they need to, but could I get, what would you tell them?
You know, when you come from the aspect of slavery, being robbed, many things, whether you're an Indian slave or African slave, concepts of saying you never had a culture, you never had a life, your people never done anything. And what I've learned over the years is that when you learn who and what you are, and you know what's in you, and know what you can achieve because your ancestors achieved it.
That's right.
And you had a culture before slavery, and you had a culture before colonialism.
Before you became a color.
And that's fire for you to move forward. And that's what I teach them. And that's what I believe in. Because my history didn't start in colonialism.
That's right.
I got dual ancestry.
Yeah.
I got Egyptian ancestry from Luxor, Egypt, the Basar, and the Beja people. And I got Yuchi ancestry off the Savannah River. I pull from both my ancestry, which are great nations and great people. When you do that, there's some cylinders inside of you called cells and organs come to life. And you can press forward and do many things. But if you waiting to get an approval to do something, you wasting your time and being whatever heritage you have in this world. It shouldn't be based on an ID card for somebody to say you something is legal, because they change laws all the time. So what happens when they get rid of Indian laws? Start disbanding. certain tribes and people and say, no, you're no longer Indian because the law says you're not. Well, you can't do that with my heritage because I never was Indian by your law anyhow. So it doesn't apply to me. And that's how I deal with things. And there's nothing to be ashamed of. And people think that they can't brace their ancestry because they don't have an ID card. I'm sorry, that's not it. That's the way I deal with things. That's the way my family deals. That's the way we're going to continue to deal with things. Because those are
Globe, I would say to that superintendent
Thank you,
of
Chief.
schools.
Excuse me, Dr. Diamond. Thank you very much, Chief, for your words. Go ahead, continue.
Yeah, I appreciate the chief's comments. I would say to the superintendent of schools first, throw out those history books. Okay, they're fiction. Maybe you want to reassign them to the fiction department in your literature department, maybe, but they're not history. So throw them out and stop teaching, history wrong, and stop teaching American history like it's mythology. All these myths that are just fiction. Teach it, but we're so far from that. What we're doing here, even talking about the doctrine of discovery and U.S. Supreme Court decisions based on notions of racial inferiority. We're being told that we can't even teach these things. We can't teach critical race theory. That's the latest. So we're so far from that. To even think about, throw out those history books, okay, and stop teaching false history. That's the place to start for sure.
Thank you, Dr. Diamond. Chief Fisher.
Yeah, thank you to both of you all for answering that question. Go ahead, Chief Langley. I'm sorry.
This is, let's give me 1 minute with this. This is something that's very significant in American history and in Indian country history. There's so much history that has been lost before the American Revolution. It's like America just tried to reinvent itself. When you go beyond the American Revolution, you're gonna find a whole lot of history about this country. You're gonna find it from the Spanish, you're gonna find it from the British, you're gonna find it from the French. You might even find some from the Germans. It's like they took on a whole new world of history and everything before then didn't exist. And when you study it past that, you will find a lot of history that deals with you and I, no matter what you mix with, because those relationships was there. There's a strong bond between Africans and Native Americans in slavery time and pre-colonial history. They don't talk about that. They don't write about those things. They make it appear to be taboo, so we don't know what we're talking about today. That's the foundation of that relationship, because those two cultures had a bond forged. They had to deal with each other because they had one common enemy, the colonial white man. That's all I have to say.
That's all. Thank you, Chief. Chief Fisher, would you like to respond to that question about, again, what to tell today's teacher? Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
I'd love to do it. I'll do it just quickly. I know that we're here for time, but really, I would say, I would ask that the educators begin to be honest with their students. And when I say be honest, I mean to help them by using cultural best practices from indigenous peoples to begin to identify their own transgenerational trauma. Their transgenerational trauma has a background of perpetuated genocide from generation to generation, one from actual direct murder, from the drowning, from the stealing. Then as the time passes, land grabbing. And I would tell them that if you can sit here in the United States of America and be normally sane after you know that your ancestors murdered Indians. You know that you're living in a house today that's on Indian land, and you're outside with a sign that says, "We support the indigenous peoples," but you still live here in Turtle Island. I would tell them to really begin to start to identify their transgenerational trauma before it becomes a natural disaster, before it becomes now you have a substance use disorder, before it becomes you become a sexual offender, before it becomes you becoming a habitual criminal offender, before it becomes this perpetuated mental health problem, before you become, you see where I'm going with this?
Yes, sir.
I
Yes,
would
sir.
tell them with honesty that it is really time to identify cultural best practices and start to implement them in their lives to deal with the intertransgenerational trauma, the internalized oppression behavioral patterns.
Gentlemen, I'm so excited about what we've already been talking about. And I think if we ended right there, that we achieved our goal. And I just want to thank you so much for our earliest conversation. And now we'd like to open it up, if I could, to some questions from the audience.
Sure.
Mr. Watson, would you mind?
Absolutely. So our first question was from Turegwa Taino Kai. And he says, we have heard of repealing of the doctrine of discovery. What are the next steps based upon a repeal or refute, and what are the remedies for these wrongs? And we can share that with any of the panelists, whoever would like to respond.
Go ahead, Professor Diamond.
No, I yield.
No, you say it.
The first place to start is that, by the way, it wasn't only the Catholic Church that wanted to Christianize the world. They weren't the only ones. It was the popes that issued the papal bulls. But first, that other churches have apologized for the doctrine of discovery and have repudiated it. Some small churches have. The Catholic Church never has. So the first thing is that the Catholic Church should apologize for its role in the conquest and colonization that resulted in near genocide of indigenous peoples. The first thing is they should apologize for it and repeat it. Other churches have. Every now and again, nations apologize for their wrongs. It's the place to start. Admit that they were wrong, and so the Catholic Church should start by saying we were wrong, and our decrees, the decrees of the popes, led to misery and despair and death, and that's the place. I think that's the place to start for sure. And the U.S. Supreme Court should stop citing it. That's the next thing. The United States Supreme Court should stop citing the doctrine of discovery. Okay? Maybe that's number two. And I would yield to my friend, the chief.
Yes, thank you, Professor Diamond, for that. I would say, I don't know if folks are aware, but, the 11th session to the United Nations Permanent Forum, the theme of that session was the doctrine of discovery. And the Pope had issued a statement, an intervention statement. Okay, it wasn't a strong statement, but it was a beginning of a statement. Then at the 16th session at the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, the Pope again motioned and put a statement on the floor that was also a motion of intervention. This intervention at the 16th session actually discussed the rights of indigenous peoples to their lands. It wasn't a hardcore statement. It was definitely a framework. And I believe that we have to create the teeth. Now, we can say diplomatic relations. We've done that for some time. I do believe that it is also up to those nations that can lawfully adjudicate international legal personality to set forth their own status of forces agreements with other nations, okay, to deal with some of these continued acts of genocide on their nations. I am not saying, for the record, to activate foreign militaries, but I am saying that nations, just like any country, any member state of the United Nations, has the same rights. As long as they have international legal personality, they can continue to exercise tribal jurisdiction to continue to protect their territorial sovereignty.
Thank you, Chief. Chief Langley, would you like to address that one, or would you like us to go to another one?
I agree with Chief to a point. The way the system is set up for an identity of Indian in this country, we can lay the ground field, we can do the work. But where it comes to benefit, it's gonna fly under the banner of those under the card-carrying federal and state. We will be the last man standing in any financial benefit. That's my perception. Because that's who they legally recognize under these constructs. So I agree. We need to be armed and protect our lands. If this is just being armed with education and knowledge and know how to combat these things.
No, I didn't say armed, for the record. I did not mention armed, for the record.
I'm from the military. You start talking soldiers.
No, I mentioned the status of forces agreements. There's diplomatic liaisons in every single nation. And we need to figure out a new strategy of diplomacy to deal with these issues at hand.
Thank you for clarification. Thank you. Do we have another question that we could?
Yes, absolutely. This one is from Behiki, Akwani Behiki. Good to have you amongst us this evening. And this question was there a difference in interpretation of the doctrine of discovery between settlers and monarchs of Europe? And we can extend that to whoever on the panel would like to respond.
Understand
I
that.
can respond to that. Oh, go ahead, Langley.
No, you go ahead, because I don't understand the question. You go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I get exactly what Behike is saying, and that's a really good point as well. You know, the settlers, they were largely lacking in regulation and enforcement of English laws. And when that took place, as a result, their interpretation of the doctrine of discovery, it was simply individualistic. It was not welcomed any other way but individualized. And you know, it was the good old slash and burn policy. You know, kill the Indian, cut his head off. Right? I mean, they did that right in my own with my own family, and they even drowned my family. You know, meanwhile, you know, colonial monarchs, they sought out to pursue, you know, more diplomatic relations, you know, with indigenous governmental systems. See, so the relations that my tribe had, specifically the Massachusetts Nation, they were diplomatic relations with the monarchs, with the King of England. But then when you had the English settlers who came over here, Miles Standish, to be a great example. He came over and he chopped the heads off of Wittawamit and Pecksuot. He chopped it, you know, he killed the Indians, you know, and that became a perpetuated act even all the way up until 1820. My family was literally drowned when they started to incorporate the towns of Pembroke and Hanson, Massachusetts. My family was drowned in the river, in the pond in which they lived on. You know, so I would say there's a major difference in the interpretation of the doctrine of discovery between the early settlers and the monarch system, definitely so.
We do know that the settlers, many of them that the monarchs set over here was criminals themselves.
Yes, that's what we're saying. Mhm. But there was a difference in their relationships. The difference was we had no diplomatic relationships with the settlers. The only time a settler sought out to have a diplomatic relationship with our nation is when he thought he could Christianize us. And if we moved into his territory, which he considered a praying Indian town, that was the only time they had relations with us, or when they were sick and they needed to use our powers to make them well again. Or when they were cold and they needed to figure out how to get, the proper clothing to survive the winters. But the monarchs, they remained diplomatic with us. Henceforth is why our Aboriginal titles to our land, they were reaffirmed inside of the general courts that succeeded the English authority kingdom, the empire. This is why we still have treaty relationships. This is why real communicable diplomatic relations between our nations and the crown, they are successive. They are still live and well.
South Carolina, even with the Spanish, the French, and the English, use a term that made treaties all null and void, even if they signed them. And that's when they call you a heathen. If you was a heathen, you were a savage. And if you wasn't Christian, they were going to rape, kill, take anything from you, even your life. No matter how diplomatic you were in South Carolina. But because you were a heathen, you were a Christian, they had the right to kill you, rape your women.
Yeah, the desire to convert the inhabitants of Turtle Island to Christianity was one aspect of the doctrine of discovery that was inherited and continued on after the revolution, and that permeates all of American federal Indian law policy. Desire to Christianize, assimilate, kill the Indian, save the man. That's one aspect that is so deep embedded in U.S. law and policy. That's it remains consistent. That desire, and it was not just the English. It was it was all of the colonial forces. The same thing. The Spanish missionaries, coming up from Mexico to convert the Indians, in the West, in California, in the missions in California and Texas and Arizona and New Mexico. That is one theme that remains consistent and is a direct result of the doctrine of discovery.
Thank you, Dr. Diamond.
Next question, and this is specifically for Chief Langley. It's from A. Gray. It says, Chief Langley, do they really have records where the settlement Indians actually signed over their land in South Carolina?
They have records. I question the X mark. So let me give you an example with that. When you look at the Treaty of Augusta in the 1700s, there's memoirs of creating chiefs, signed treaties to represent tribes of people who were no longer in existence and never been in existence, and they were treaty signers. They had slaves signing treaties because they were using the X mark. So from that aspect to their questions, I would say yes. Are those things lawful? They did them. So yes, from that aspect, they exist. Now, will they stand up in a court of law today? Because you go back and look at some of these people that signed these treaties, they got African names. They got Indian names from India. not common to the names of these specific tribes that were in those different areas. Am I making any sense? Now, that's one thing I learned about studying history. I studied from a forensic perspective. So you got to investigate history. If not, you're going to miss the boat on these things. Because it's been one-sided for so long. When did the Native Americans start really writing about themselves? 30, 40, 50 years ago?
Really recently.
So everything written.
Right.
Dr. Diamond, your head's about to fall off the way that you were nodding along while listening to.
I agree. I agree.
I'd like to piggyback
Go ahead,
on something. You know, some nations were very fortunate. You know, they were unfortunate, but they were fortunate. I know here on the East Coast, we were sent back and forth to England. And while they thought that we were just there to interpret, some of our ancestors was actually listening in, taking note. Then when they came back, they were teaching our own how to set up perpetual restrictive covenant reservation lands. This is why, even in those early documents that we read today, those early documents have done us a great favor. And the fact that we were so comprehensive and so strategic back then in listening and going over there to England, you know, and taking what we learned in the court and the legalese system, and we actually applied them to our own reservations. This is why we still have our reservations today, regardless. You know, the administrative obligations of these reservations fall underneath the tribe's jurisdiction lawfully. And at this time now, you see Neil Gorsuch at the US Supreme Court. He says that the rule of the strong will no longer prevail over the rule of the law. And that's the law. And we're going to continue to administrate our jurisdiction over the law, Indian law and also federal law.
Dr. Dunn, I'd like to add something to the mix with the current political situation and the appointees to the Supreme Court and how they're talking about wanting to appoint people who do not interpret but are specific to the letter of the Constitution. Would that be a benefit or a drawback to American Indians perhaps gaining their sovereignty?
That's a very hard question to answer.
Can I just say something really quick? I'm sorry, Professor Diamond. I said earlier, you know, gaining sovereignty is impossible. Sovereignty is an inherent right. Sovereignty is an inherent right from our Creator. We can never forget where we come from and who we are. You cannot gain sovereignty. You can gain legal jurisdiction.
Thank you. Thank you.
Law, but you cannot gain sovereignty. It's an inherent right.
I appreciate it. I misspoke, and thank you for that clarity, because the truth is important. Thank you.
No problem.
Well, so to answer the question about what would happen if Supreme Court justices, you know, were those of the approach to original intent, I think was your question. First, you know, what Chief Fisher says, you know, about Justice Gorsuch, you know, is very important to note. Now, you know, Trump appointee and wrote the most positive U.S. Supreme Court decision for Indian tribes in 25 years, and so that's, you know, that's a good sign. So I think that so just to point out, I thought that Justice Ginsburg did a lot of good things, and for Indigenous women, you know, she wrote a decision that was very helpful for Indigenous women who are victims of domestic violence in U.S. versus Bryant. But she also wrote a lot of bad decisions for Indians, including the one that I've been talking about all evening in 2005, citing the doctrine of discovery. That was Justice Ginsburg. So I think that if justices are willing to look at the real history of the relationships between nations, you know, in the formation of the United States, and the early period of contact, that they're willing to look at that instead of saying it's too late to look at that. Look, there's too many people living in too many houses, and we're not going to take away anyone's land and, give the Indians land and give them right. They're just going to build casinos, instead of that sort of approach that we've had for the last 25, 30 years, if the justices start to look at the true history, in the formation of the Constitution, and remember, the Constitution had its foundations in natural law. The drafters of the Constitution believed in inherent rights and natural law. So that might not be a bad thing if we went back in that direction, I think. And so maybe again, there's some optimism here.
Dr. Diamond, I got a question for you. In the Southeast, let's say there were 2,000 ethnic groups. And these 2,000 ethnic groups got diminished down to 5 civilized tribes. So how are 5 tribes going to speak for 2,000 ethnic groups of people? So you got the Choctaw and Chickasaw, which basically I believe are the same people. The Creek and Seminole, to a point, is the same people. And you got the Cherokees. How do you get 5 civilized tribes out of that?
Well,
And out of all ethnic groups in the Southeast, somebody just threw a serious curveball. Because when you go back and look at the records, one tribe during the Spanish time would be called one thing. Then when the British come, these same people are named something else. And when the French come, the same people name something else. So who really are these people?
well, Chief, who says that the 5 quote unquote civilized tribes? By the way, I think maybe it's a term we should stop using.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because who came up with that term?
Exactly.
But that was the U.S. came up with that term because they thought that there were 5 nations that could be Christianized, assimilated a little faster, and because, wait for it, they took Indians as slaves. So so first let's maybe stop using the term 5 civilized tribes. But Chief Langley, who said that those 5 nations who were made to walk across the U.S. at gunpoint to Oklahoma, who said that they speak for 5,000 ethnic groups?
Exactly. Since the other groups are labeled uncivilized, where did all these people go?
Well, that's
They
still
just disappeared in thin air?
Yeah, that's the interesting question about where do these people go. So I think one of the reflections I have on this evening's discussion is that of the thousands of groups of indigenous peoples who are very, very diverse and can't be generalized about, maybe they are in a better position to assert indigeneity than those nations that have been quote unquote recognized, because they still hold all the cards, because they've never been conquered.
Exactly.
They've never been conquered. They've never signed treaties. They've never been conquered, and therefore they still hold all the the rights of sovereignty that they've always had. Maybe they hold all the cards.
Right. They never contracted.
They didn't contract anything away.
They are not considered in law domesticated, or dependent on nations. So they're not considered domestic dependent nations. And if their rights, their tribal laws, their inherent sovereignty, their adjudication to exercise tribal jurisdiction if those things were never abrogated,
Right.
then it never happened. And let me tell you something. By law, in order for you to abrogate something, what do you have to do first? You have to recognize it, don't you?
I agree with you. I agree
The
with
right
you. Maybe.
The right to self-determination, by virtue of that right, it says that tribes and indigenous peoples can exercise their political, social, and economic status as indigenous peoples. But when that is internally or externally interfered with, then that is absolutely a breach of human rights.
Some of what I'm hearing throughout this whole discussion is that it's there. You must reclaim it. And a lot of the trauma from the past has made folks not believe, not understand, not know how. But if you're willing to stand and claim it and speak the language that's necessary within the legal system, that it's there for you. I see, Mr. Watson, you're trying to say something?
Yeah, I want to direct this question towards Professor Diamond. I think it ties into what Chief Wampatuck just said. This is a question coming from our chat. It's from let me get the name right here. Jay Sachem says, how do we make our government accountable to the treaties and doctrine of discovery method to rob us of our rightful lands? And in particular, Professor Diamond, because this is a area that we've been discussing in terms of fauna, is Article 6, Clause 1 of the United States Constitution, which, if I paraphrase, pretty much says all of the agreements that were valid underneath the Confederation are valid underneath the United States Constitution. So in that vein, just with that little bit of U.S. constitutional law shared, how do tribes go about kind of making the government accountable to those treaties in light of this whole doctrine of discovery situation?
Well, it's a challenge, but I think that the goal is to make the United States start owning up to its rights to uphold human rights, and so through the international system, through the UN, through the international treaty bodies, through the Permanent Forum, make the United States accountable for human rights. The United States likes to tell other nations that they, should do a better job. Likes to tell China, likes to tell Russia, they should do a better job. Likes to tell Korea, do a better job with human rights. Yet the United States does not sign on to all of the treaties.
Well, they're also not a participant in the International Criminal Court of Justice. So
the United States does absolutely. Chief Fisher is right. The United States does not recognize the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. Okay, it doesn't sign. The United States says it can violate environmental law, to uphold borders. The United States. So the first thing to do is to force the United States to do a better job of upholding human rights. And I say exercising your voices in the international systems. Make the United States, hold the United States accountable for human rights, upholding human rights, because they're the first ones to tell China to do it. And so recognize the jurisdiction, sign the treaties, get your US senators, to ratify these treaties that they haven't ratified, rather than walk away from them time and time again. I think maybe that's a start, is to use your voice in the international system. Look, indigenous nations probably could be treated better by the UN as well, rather than give them a permanent forum. Give them seats. Give them seats in the UN, not just a forum. You know what I'm saying? Give them more ability to raise their voices in the international communities. That's one suggestion, to Hawks, to make the United States a better international player within the human rights system.
Yeah,
please, Chief Fisher.
Yeah, thank you. Just really quick, just to piggyback on that. you know, the concept in nation building, Professor Joseph Colt over at the Harvard Kennedy School, he throws a really good course, and I encourage folks who are indigenous leaders to go and audit those courses. You know, he's very welcoming to indigenous leaders to audit over at Harvard Kennedy School in the nation building course. But you know, the greatest model.
Yeah, he talks a lot about a cultural match.
Absolutely. And one of the greatest models that I've ever heard come out of that course was was modeling after the Nike model. You know, for Indian nations, you just do it. Just do it. And if you know that you have protections under your tribal jurisdiction, then you go into court and you stand up there and you go in there proud and you know what you have. But if you're shaky, you don't feel confident, then don't you dare step into that cage. But if you're confident and you know what you have, they have to follow the rule of the law, and you make them do it. And I'm not talking from a place of, you know, not knowing. I'm talking from being a non-federally recognized tribe, a non-state recognized tribe. I walked into the Commonwealth State of Massachusetts court system, and I reserved my tribal court right to the Mattakesett tribal court without being federally knowledge or state knowledge ever. And the Commonwealth now recognizes the Mattakesett tribal court as a court system. So I'm not telling you from, you know, from pulling something out of the sky. I'm telling you from what I know for a fact. When you do something, you do it. My tribe is right now, we're looking to gain our reservation into the proper jurisdiction of the Mattakesett tribal court. What do? We just put locks on the gate. It is what it is. If they don't like it, you take us to court. You know, it's the motto is just do it. And you got to do it. If you know what you have.
Absolutely. Start somewhere. You know, you don't have to build a post office, but start somewhere. You know, people are hurting. You know, people are, people need help.
We're in a pandemic. You know,
need help.
Yeah, the administration, the obligation of the administration of treaties and Aboriginal titles, they all right now fall under public safety. You are a responsible party for the public safety. We're in a national pandemic. Don't let anyone believe that you cannot protect your own people during this time. Don't wait for federal dollars. Don't wait for state money. Don't wait for a recognition system to acknowledge that you have the right to do it. Just remember, you have a sovereign inherent right to do what you need to do to protect the public safety, not just of your tribe, but also from domestic and foreign terrorists. You have the same obligation as the President of the United States. I'm no different than Donald Trump.
Yeah, you are. Much better. Much.
You understand?
Yes.
You have an obligation to protect your territorial sovereignty and to protect these borders of this country.
Well, and you're right. You're right to keep your people healthy and safe. You know, and you're right. I love the Nike model. Just do it. What's preventing you from establishing a tribal health center?
Well, I'll tell you what it is. It's threat. It's coercion. Wow. You know, it's these de facto laws that have been acting under the color of law. It's all of that stuff. But again, you finally get to a point where you say, look, you know, if I know this to be right,
that's right,
then why don't I die trying for my people? That is the most honorable way to go and spend the rest of your life in a prison. That's the most honorable way to be killed on sight. That's the most honorable way for the federal government to set me up. Dying for my people is the honorable way that we need to do this. And we just do it. We just do it.
Well, who's going to stop you from starting an indigenous traditional tribal court where you resolve people's differences, where you restore kinship and restore relationships and restore bonds? Who's going to stop you from that? And
I'll tell you, Professor Diamond, our tribal court has been active for the last 3 years. We just nominated our 2 new justices, Chief Raymond Tuhawks. He's also one of our court justices. He works in our appellant court. Paul Malidi is our Chief Justice in our First Circuit Court of the Matakeesit Tribal Court. And we do it, we do it.
Yeah, I mean, the Western courts, look, I practiced law in Western courts for 30 years. I was a state prosecutor, a felony prosecutor for 6 and a defense lawyer for 20. And I left it very, very frustrated with the court system, the revolving door of justice. And, and I think it's time to go back. I had this conversation with a group of tribal folks out in California, and they were all depressed and despondent. And I said, look, you can take your traditions and your culture and build your own court system. And the woman said to me, we don't remember what they were, our traditions. We don't remember what they were. Well, you better start, maybe talk to some of the elders who are still around, who do remember, before it's too late. The Eastern Cherokee did something very interesting, I thought. The Eastern Cherokee in their tribal court decided that they were going to do something about the fact that the elders were not going to be around forever. The elders who remembered the old ways of resolving differences. And they created a project for the youth. Kids, take your cell phones and go interview elders and make recordings of the way we used to resolve our differences. And the Eastern Cherokee made a video library for the tribal court of interviews with elders on traditional dispute resolution. And it's now a separate room in the tribal court, videos of elders talking about the ways they used to resolve the differences, so that this is not law. And it was great, and it made the kids feel like they were doing something valuable and important, and it made the elders feel important. And it's critical to get this history before, in fact, it's too late.
Well, I'd like to just say, piggyback on that just quickly. I often hear that word, before it gets too late. The English language is a much different language than the indigenous language. In Matakeesit, there's no such thing as it's becoming too late. And again, it's the adoption of evolution of our culture. We are well aware that colonization took place. We're well aware that our family and tribe was genocided against. So even if those elders are no longer around, it is your sovereign inherent right to continue your culture. And in our culture, we talk to our creator. Our creator gives us the tools that we need to continue our traditions. See, that's a big part of the culture that most Indian people miss today, because that conversation, the same conversation, is before it gets too late, like as if we have a race.
No, I mean, talk to the elders while they're still around.
Absolutely.
I understand, but I want to make it very clear that
I agree with you. It's never too late.
Yeah, it's never too late.
The Nike model, it's never too late.
Yeah, I don't even want people to even begin to even think of that. It's never too late. I don't care if there's no elders, if there's only a 4-year-old in your tribe, if creator gives that 4-year-old the tools that 4-year-old needs to sustain, even as minute as simply just breathing, and it's Matakeesit breath, that's enough to call it a cultural best practice.
Amen. So just do it. Who's going to stop you?
Do it.
And I'm not asking for help, is what the three of you have talked about. They may not stop you, but they're not going to help you. And what I mean, like starting your own courts, and I'm speaking about that from some of my experience with Chief Two Hawks, that it's there for us. They can't stop you. I joke with Chief about how sometimes some of the stuff that he's learning in law school is like Harry Potter spells, meaning you got to say it the right way to get the right outcome. If you pronounce something just a little bit wrong, it'll have a different meaning and bring about a different outcome. You got to learn, you got to learn how to say it right with confidence. Don't ask for help. And thank you so much. Just do it. Raymond, Mr. Watson, do you have something?
Sure, we had a comment. I did want to just acknowledge this comment, but because it comes from our extended family, Miss Shanae Bullock from the Shinnecock Montauk family, who actually participated on a panel last week with Professor Diamond that was hosted by the Federal District Court for the District of Rhode Island, dealing with domestic violence issues in the indigenous community. So Aquani, Shanae, very good to have you here. She asked, what advice can be given to tribes who have conformed to becoming classified as federally recognized or state recognized, but who are not waking up?
I'll take a quick shot at it if no one else wants to. The conversation, Ms. Bullock, it goes back to inherent sovereignty. The inherent sovereignty lies within the nation. The nation has rights to develop its constitution. Inside the constitution, the nation has rights to change its constitution through however way that tribe is set up, whether it's through voting powers, whether it's through some dictatorship and it's an executive order. I don't know. But I'll tell you something. You know, adding an amendment to your constitution that continues to reserve your jurisdiction for the greatest protections of your nation, there's no problem with doing that. Amendments in your constitution are okay. If you don't see something going well with the partnership with the federal government, amend your constitution. And then you let the federal government know by way of vote, by the powers that are vested in our nation, we feel that this is a threat to our nation and we can no longer go in that direction. But we're willing to do A, B, and C, but we cannot and will not do D. Just do it.
Yeah, I would add to what Chief Fisher says to Shanae, who I had the pleasure of serving on a panel with just last week, who is a beautiful person and extremely intelligent and is going to change things. I would say, when the tribes that are recognized by state or federal government, you don't always have to take everything they offer and adopt all Western practices. It doesn't, the fact that like Chief Fisher says, talks about constitutions. Well, they wrote these IRA model boilerplate constitutions for tribes and said, you need to imitate us. You need to have a legislature and a president, and you need to do things our way. And if you're going to have a court, it's got to be like our courts. Or, you don't have to imitate all of the Western ways just because you've accepted recognition. You can still forge your own path. Right. And don't give up. Pick like Chief Fisher says. Pick something to do, whether it's A, B, C, or D. Pick a place to start. Maybe it's too much. To manage all the natural resources, but it's a good thing to do. Maybe tribal court is too much, but pick something to do. Pick a place to start. And start there, and then pick a place that maybe will bring some revenue, to the tribe, so that you can do some other things as well. But if you have leaders who just want to do things the Western way, maybe it's time for some new leaders.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. This has been a fantastic conversation, and we are now coming to about 15 minutes left in our scheduled session. And we'd like to actually open up now, if it's okay, to hear maybe from some of our audience with final statements. Is that what you meant, Mr. Watson, or did you want folks to type it up?
No. I want to hear from our panelists. We've got about 15 minutes left. We said from 7 to 9. So I'd like to hear any closing remarks that they might want to share just to make sure we get them we did have a few questions after that. So after we get what our panelists would like to leave our audience with, if they would like to stick around, I'll entertain some more questions from our chat.
And he and I have been communicating via text, and I misread that last text. Sorry about that. Final statements from our guest panelists, please.
We've engaged in hemp farming in Africa. We got 10,000 acres. Doing a 5,000 acre solar farm in Ghana. So I connected with those different kingdoms and countries across the border to get things done. South Carolina and the Baptist Church didn't want us to do any hemp, so I took it abroad and we're doing it. So those are the options that you have when you're a non-federally recognized tribe. You can go sign treaties with those countries and forge those relationships and make things happen. That's what we're doing.
Thank you, Chief.
I wanted to just leave off quickly with two things. One was, I started with opening up with the regards of the Taino Arawak people. And I continue to say that because truly, as I've been educated, by their community, they really took the brunt. They bear the brunt of this doctrine of discovery. Not to say that it wasn't successive and its ideology didn't reach other nations, but I want to just leave it and say my continued regards, for those nations, those Caribbean nations who really were affected by the doctrine of discovery, and that our prayers are continued with all of you all, and that we're thinking of you all continuously. And the Matakesik tribe, we certainly support you all in trying to find better ways to come underneath or come up out of the doctrine of discovery. And I hope that we left you all with some jewels that may be pertinent to the continued plight in the reach for that. And then lastly, I wanted to say something. I wanted to leave with this. The doctrine of discovery was essentially canceled, as a legal precedent, because it was really based on the premise of terra nullis, right, or empty land. Since the Indians weren't able to, since we were able to get the monarchs to acknowledge and respect our governancy, they were acknowledging that the land was not empty, but rather that indigenous nations were well inhabited. So what I'm trying to say right there is, is really the doctrine of discovery, does it contradict itself? Look at the American Civil War. It was a result over the monarchs canceling of false titles to land. Charles I, Charles II, William and Mary. I mentioned William and Mary earlier. They were all constantly canceling settler titles to the land as a way to consolidate power. English Civil War of 1646, excuse me. Same situation. Monarchs and landlords fought to decide who the balance of power was. So the reality is we develop our own doctrines that point back at them, 360, and it points right back at them, a little Heyoka medicine on them. What's really happening here in the doctrine of discovery? You put the burden of proof of jurisdiction back in their court again. Who's right and wrong? You guys confusing me. I don't know. I don't understand your language. I don't understand these written documents because we don't. It was forced upon us, but it wasn't forced upon us with any free, prior, informed consent. There was no consent. There was no participation. There's no consultation in it. So I just want to leave you with that. These things were canceled out. And it is what it is. They were canceled out. There's so many ways that you can find that they were canceled out.
Thank you, Chief Fisher. Dr. Diamond, do you have any final words, sir?
Yes, never at a loss.
I can tell.
I have a lot to say. But anyway, I want to thank the Cultural Equity Initiative for hosting this panel and the programs that have been going on all week long. I learned a lot, and certainly my honor to appear here today with Chief Fisher and Chief Langley and Globe. Thank you for moderating. Listen, you know, what's going on in New England, I think is, you know, I didn't know it was happening when I got here. And I'm so excited to learn about it. And Roger Williams University, you know, and the law students there that have formed, you know, a student association, Native American Student Association, you know, that's brand new. The fact that federal Indian law is being taught at Roger Williams University after not being taught for God knows how long is a good thing. I just want to put in a somewhat shameless plug for the work we do at the Southwest Center for Law and Policy and the National Tribal Trial College. We train Indigenous survivors of violence to be victim advocates in tribal courts and courts all over the land. So we write code. If you're looking for help writing code, if you're looking for help creating tribal courts, it's what we do. You know, and rather than focus on the negative, we're helping build. So if I can help in any way, with any of your peoples to you know, to build and to exert sovereignty, we're happy to do that. That's what we do, and I'm excited about the future for Indigenous peoples, you know, everywhere, but certainly here in New England with what I see as this energy and this optimism, this excitement that's going on right in front of my eyes. So thanks for including me.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. This has been an incredible conversation that I've learned so much, and I'm just humbled to be on this the moderator for this, and to have 3 chiefs, modern chiefs, on this call working to continue traditions and not ask for permission, just do it, and we can't be stopped. It's kind of the lessons I'd like to say. And Mr. Watson, I think you embody all of those things, given you started a lot of this stuff decades ago. So Mr. Watson, I think it'd be the right place for you to have the last words for this event. Thank you so much, everybody.
So once again, just so honored for our very distinguished panel. Thank you all, because I know that everyone on this panel is extremely busy. I had the opportunity to know Chief Langley and Chief Fisher, not only just as chiefs from fellow nations that are first contact nations, but on personal level and as friends. So I'm aware of a lot of the things that are just going on, just trying to be a leader for your people. So honor to both of you and Katapatush for being here tonight. Professor Diamond, once again, I mean, we had federal Indian law class today, and we were actually going back and forth with oral arguments. And I am so excited to have this gentleman in this region, not only because of the wealth of knowledge that he brings, but because he's also willing to stand on what he believes to be right. And that has been so much of the problem, especially when we've dealt with the legal field out here, finding attorneys or even just legal scholars that when they see what the right thing is, don't stick their head in the sand, don't turn and walk the other way. And above all else, don't get into this notion of, well, you're not federally recognized, or you're not state recognized, or you don't look like. It's so refreshing and encouraging, Professor Diamond, to run into a legal mind like you, who understands that those things are just colonial concepts that we need to let go of. So I want to say Katapatush to you as well, Professor, for your participation. And of course, to the good brother, Globe Mitush, Snapping Turtle, that is this given name. But so grateful that you were able to moderate. For those who do not know, we did this fantastic discussion back in 2016 at another institution that I won't name because I don't like them much. But if you Google Indian slavery at a certain university that's in the state, you'll see that it pops up with about 3.2 million views right now. And this brother, he showed up at the event, and I said, "Hey, Globe, man, you're gonna moderate tonight." And he was like, "I'm gonna what?" I said, "Yeah, you're gonna moderate." And he was like, well, what am I talking about? I was like, you'll figure it out, but I got to go in the back and I got to get. So as this one came around, he reached out a number of weeks ago and said, hey, look, last time you kind of just threw me into the fire. I'd like to be the moderator for this one, but let me know in advance so I can do some preparing. So I want to thank Globe for his commitment and his just, sticking with it as we've grown the Providence Cultural Equity Initiative and all of the things that we've just been doing here in Rhode Island and in the larger New England region. And on the East Coast, I would say at this point, just to raise awareness about, as our people say, Iniski Tumpawag, we are still here. And indeed, we mean that when we say that. And I really like Chief Wampatuck's words, because Snappy Turtle's been with me in a couple of situations where it's been like, this could be dangerous if we weren't moving in the capacity that we're moving, even coming down to engaging with law enforcement in the open environment. So thank you, Globe, appreciate you. Just for final words that I have, just to continue these dialogues in whatever capacity or form or space they may be in. But most of all, I want to say that, as you can see from the panel that are here and from the words that were shared, that there are people out here who have knowledge and who have made progressive steps that are always willing to share if it's in a right spirit. We got a couple of questions, and once we get through, we will get to some of them. But understanding that these things were done in traditional ways and in traditional manners, and that we have to get back to that. It's not about claiming that I was misclassified and then I'm going to run and do what I want, but it's about taking the time to actually understand and learn who your people were and are before colonization hit. Slavery, colonization, those are all experiences of our people. They do not define our people. And what I found to be the most rewarding is taking the time to understand how things were done before. And it's not an easy process. It's not a process a lot of times that I like, because it forces me to look at myself and realize just how colonized I still am, even though I consider myself to be in a continual decolonization process. But, to take the time to get back to understanding. And then I would also suggest, because as you can see on our panel, we have individuals with all different heritages from all different backgrounds, to get away from this racial stuff, because that was what was forced upon us as a part of colonization. It's a divider. It divides you on the size of your nose, the color of your skin, the texture of your hair, and it divides people, and it takes people away from their heritage, and it makes people ashamed to be who they are. None of us have any right to be ashamed of who we are. We are here today because our ancestors thrived and survived through something. We are here today because our ancestors did some things that they shouldn't have done. Whatever the case may be, we are here today, and we can learn from all of those past things and craft a more comprehensive and a more beautiful future with each other, for each other, and respecting each other for our relationships with these very lands and whatever lands we come from. So I just want to say katapatush once again to everyone that's in our audience, everyone who asked questions, everyone who commented on Facebook, everyone who's going to share this discussion. Just thank you. Thank you for making this topic a topic of interest. Thank you for providing a space and an audience for us to share this. And thank you for your individual efforts to just learn more about who you are and to learn more about who the Aboriginal nations of these lands are. So just thank you all, and we greatly appreciate it. We are at the 9 p.m.
Hold on, look, I can't, another chief is claiming some time.
Absolutely. We got to get the chief his time. Absolutely.
Quick, just a very quick remarks. Just traditionally, we do this. We do honorable humiliation, where we come from, and I just want to say, Two Hawks, man, I've had the real honor and privilege, to watch you grow over the many years. I've seen people take shots at you, I've seen people support you, but one thing though, your heart has never changed. You've done this honesty, you've done this with dignity, you've done this with integrity, you've done this with compassion, you've done this with love, you've done this with the Creator at the forefront, in everything that you do. And I want to publicly just honor you, for your continued work and support and diligence to our nations here. You know, brother, we love you, we care about you, you know, and we support you, you know, and you have nations that are standing by you. And you mark my words on that. You have nations that are standing by you. And we thank you for your continued work and effort.
Aho,
Very good.
go and do, just get it done and just do it, y'all.
Just do it.
Sure. So if our panelists would humor us, if they have to go, we definitely understand. And we thank you for the 2 hours of your time. But, you know, this was an interesting discussion and we had a few more questions in the chat. So if anyone wants to stick around and answer, that's fine. If everyone wants to pack it up, we can pack up the show too. But I'll just post this first question. This is from Keela Johnson. It says, could you speak to what types of implementation are necessary for government to government relationships between the tribes and other types of governments?
I guess I can take a quick shot at that. To Ms. Johnson's question, I think the type of implementation, the continued effort of diplomacy, you know, and again, the act of just doing it, you know, for a lot of our tribes, this is 400 years. It's been 400 years, you know, and I've said to my tribal members, as long as I'm in office, it will not be another 401 years. 400 years is definitely where it has to stop. But again, diplomatic approaches, diplomatic approaches, diplomatic approaches. You know, communication is effective, whether it's in, you know, relationships, friendships, you know, these are still relationships. You know, the truth is you're not going to get rid of people. You know, I mean, COVID-19 might have been some kind of a strategic agent of change, you know, that may get rid of some people, but it hasn't gotten rid of everybody, you know, and again, diplomatic relations, you know, effective communication. I think those are the implementation processes to get these things moving. That's where it's at, I believe. So.
Any of our other panelists care to respond? I unmuted you, sir. Chief Langley, did you want to share any thoughts?
We have a business model. So I'm in the technology field, been in the technology field for 32 years, cybersecurity, smart city. So I always approach different nations from the aspect of business relationships. And that's what I've done with our different treaties that we've signed outside of the United States. So that tends to work with our relationships. Many of these foreign countries have lands and they don't have the technology. So you can bring the technology and the business plan and the know-how. You can help develop those kingdoms and those nations. And that's what we've done. It never hurts to reach outside the United States because it can be difficult dealing with some of these nations here inside the US. So I chose to go outside. You know, you got that stigma. You're not federally recognized. You're not state recognized. When I start reaching down in the Caribbean with the Hong Kong Maroons, and start going over to some of the African kingdoms, they don't even care about that. Went down to Colombia, they don't care about it. What can you do for us? So that's what we're done.
Excellent, Chief. Thank you. I'm going to pull up another one, and this one was shared right in our comment section sent over to me. This is coming from a Ryan McGuire. It says, would anyone on the panel support the immediate decolonization of the Senate and the House as a modern power space, given as a part of reparations for Indigenous and Black people? Thoughts?
How are you going to do it?
Chief Fisher, did you have a response to that, or did you want to? allow that question to pass.
Sometimes it's difficult for me to answer those questions. Sometimes I just simply don't recognize some of those structures. So I don't know if that somehow supports that conversation. You only recognize what is really in your own reality. Those systems are very far reached from one of in union with Matakeesit, and it's just difficult to deal, with that. But I mean, again, I think Chief Langley said it best. How are you going to do that? That's a great question.
Let me give you an example for reparations. I developed a waste management cleanup for the whole continent of Africa. Just signed the contract 2 months ago. I won a $120 million contract over the next 10 years by doing that. That's my reparations. I can do a lot with that, with myself, my community. Sometime to gain opportunities, we have to go outside this country. You got to get outside the box. You're handicapped here, but you have a lot of talent, knowledge. Make yourself international. An international impact can have a serious impact here on the local level once you get it done. I didn't exist, but I have more congressmen calling me now. They didn't call me before. I tell you what, this is what I want down in South Carolina for you people there. See if we're gonna play some politics. Give me this, then I can help you with that. So we have to think creatively. You got to realize that many of our ancestors for colonial time, some of them may have been traveling the globe. All of these things are in us. I always see myself as I lived 500 years ago. I'm my ancestor living today. That's how I view things. Many of us are not conscious of those things because those old stories are not passed down. So we got to go deal in spirit. So I've learned the road less traveled, the spirit road, can be a lonely one. You're going to hit some frustrations. You're going to find yourself alone. But if you got some willpower and some courage, you get it done. I don't mind going to battle by myself because I'm not alone. Because in my mind, in my spirit, I got 10,000 ancestors around me. You better look in the spirit, see what you're dealing with. Might get your feelings hurt. It is the strength from within that makes a man strong, not the outward appearance. What's in him? These are things you have to do. That's all I have.
Good. We've got another very good one. This is from Bahike again. What is the difference between sovereignty and jurisdiction?
Please.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it actually already earlier. Again, sovereignty is an inherent right. Jurisdiction has to be assumed by a court of law to protect the sovereign inherent right of your tribe's sovereignty, of your nation's sovereignty.
Let me piggyback on something here. I'm going to speak to you guys from a genealogical perspective. Studying your family history back before the American Revolution, and many of your ancestors you will find later in time, your free people of color, your colored people, your landowners. Well, during the British colonial times, many of your ancestors are lords and barons and baronets. Your nobility, you have it. You research that, you might be able to do something with it today. I helped a family in Charleston, South Carolina, 10 years ago, that their fifth generation grandfather, 200 years ago, purchased 200 acres of land. So let's fast forward to 2010. Marriott went out there and built a 185-room hotel on this property. It was never sold. It was a property transferred. I don't know how much they got paid, but I say this much: the next 5 generations don't have to worry about nothing. It was heir property. Marriott, because it wasn't a legal transfer of title, they still own it. That's something many people should take a look at, especially when you are Native American with African ancestry, or vice versa. I just want to give you a little hint to that.
Very good. Thank you, Chiefs. I got another question. This was an earlier one. And I think this is a good question. I think this is a good opportunity to provide some clarity on this because I get a lot of questions that are in this regard. It says, how do we actively walk in our sovereignty as Indigenous people today, given the current United States system that we find ourselves in? What are the steps that can be taken to activate our sovereignty within an oppressive corporation? Before I turn it over to the Chiefs, I'll just share this bit of context because we get this so much. If you're talking tribal stuff, then the sovereignty comes through the tribe. I've had to address my own tribal members about it, moving in this sort of sovereign citizen mindset that I can do what I want. That's not valid. I'm going to turn it over to our Chiefs now so that they can share some thoughts on it.
Yeah, could you read that one more time, please?
How do we actively walk in our sovereignty as Indigenous people today, given the current United States system that we find ourselves in? What are the steps that can be taken to activate our sovereignty within an oppressive corporation?
Continue to breathe and exist.
Many don't understand sovereignty. And like you said, Two Hops, they think it's a free pass to go out here and run red lights, shoot people, have accidents. I'm sovereign. I won't be arrested. Your man going to jail. Bottom line, your black ass going to jail. You my language. I'm gonna be straight. So they don't understand the aspect of sovereignty, especially when it comes from some more science ideology. I'm not driving, I'm traveling. No, I don't need a driver license. I got an ID card. No. The minute you're on that paid public highway, the minute you're in that manufactured vehicle, it don't apply. You got to be careful with that. So there's a lot of misconception with that, which get a lot of people in trouble. I'm not going to buy this house. I'm going to squat. All right. Sheriff coming to get you. Give you a little time where they can bill up some charges. Then you find yourself in jail for 8-9 years for squatting. Mortgage fraud. This is a totally misunderstanding. And it hurts a lot because the most people that get caught up in this are people of the Black, Negro, and colored community. Leave it alone, understand it. That's not the way it works. That's all I can say on it.
Good. Chief Fisher, did you want to add any more thoughts to that?
You know, no, I think I'll pass on that.
Okay. And I'll just share some thoughts as well. And this goes back to my conversation about the race and the color thing. Your color is not what is going to give you rights in these lands. The texture of your hair is not what is going to give you rights in these lands. Calling yourself a copper-colored Aborigine is not going to give you rights in these lands. Who your people are is what is going to give you any rights that you may have, and it's going to be tied specifically to what rights your people had. So when you're sitting here and looking at this panel right now, when you look at Chief Fisher, when you look at Chief Langley, when you look at myself, these are chiefs that have already confirmed blood ties back to chiefs who were in positions to say what was what and where was where at first contact. Yeah. That's why we're able to move in the space that we are. It's not because I grew a mohawk. It's not because I dance in the powwow. It's not because a lot of the original Aboriginal folk here were a certain skin tone. None of that's going to help. Those are all colonial concepts that were placed upon us to get us to divide amongst one another. It is all about your bloodline and your specific bloodline, not the Indians that were in the state where you live now, and because they was that, you're this. Not because you saw a picture and you resemble the person that's in it. None of that matters. None of that matters. Who are your people? What are your bloodlines? What is your personal experience? How are you overcoming it now? Do you understand the law and how it applies to you? Not how it applies to the person next to you, not how it applies to the person who just walked through that door before you. How does it apply to you, and what is your personal narrative? And for anyone who's looking to decolonize and exercise sovereignty and all that, that's where you start with yourself and with your family. Because there is a chance, Chief Langley spoke about it, a lot of that history is, they don't talk about all of the darker skinned people that came colonizing as well, who tie back to these European powers. They don't talk about that. So if you have that aspect as well, if you have Indians who are helping Europeans to enslave other Indians, what good is it to claim to be an Indian? You might have been a part of that group who was on the bottom end and switched over with the Europeans because you didn't like how the Indians above you were treating you. That doesn't give you land claim rights to the land. Your people were still who they were before they did what they did. So it all ties back to you, your individual narrative, your individual story, your individual bloodlines. And that's where you need to stop before you can have any questions about not having to abide by or not needing to or not. All of that, like Chief Langley said, is going to get you locked up. I've actually had a couple of tribal members that I've had to address because they're blood tribal members, but conducting themselves like that. And here I am at court having to speak on their behalf, totally embarrassed because that's not the way they should be conducting themselves. And if they were actually understanding of who they were and how they're supposed to be operating, would not have been trying the thing that got them in trouble in the first place. So that'll be my remarks there. It's all about your blood and your individual narrative. We don't do this generic sort of, I'm a copper colored, or I look like this, or the original Indians look like that, so that means I can do this now.
Here's a historical footnote. When Andrew Jackson went into Florida to raid the Seminoles, this is what he saw. He saw Aborigines, he saw Asian Indians, he saw Indians, and he saw Negroes. He described all of these people differently. So that goes to show there's no one common type phenotype of Aboriginal or Indian people here in America. That's a footnote.
So our power comes from our pre-colonial titles, is some of what I'm hearing, and that you were something before your people became a color. And what is that? The importance of going back and knowing one's history. And the power is found, like we hear, from within.
Can you repeat that question again?
Now, it's just on a soapbox for a second.
I just want to take a moment to acknowledge at least two chiefs that are from the area that are in the chat right now. Chief Dwayne Yellowfeather Shepherd and Chief Keyshawn Red Spirit Jackson. Chief Shepherd is from the Pocasset Pokanoket. Chief Jackson is from the Wabakwasit Nipmuc. Other tribal leaders in the region here. So just want to take the time to acknowledge our tribal leaders that are in the region here.
Aquani.
Aquani, Chief. So we are at about the 9:21 minute. We've gone about 20 minutes past our initial time frame. I don't want to belabor it. This conversation has been recorded, so it'll be uploaded once I am done here. Once again, on behalf of the Providence Cultural Equity Initiative, I want to thank Chief Wampanoag Wampatuck. I want to thank High Priest King Langley. I want to thank Professor Diamond, who stepped off. And I want to thank all of our audience members who posed questions and took the time just to learn and inform themselves tonight. This is what it's all about. This is, I'm grateful that the dialogues and the comments stayed respectful, didn't get ignorant, didn't get into racist nonsense, because all of that stupidity. We're all here to learn. And I think we can all agree that none of us knows the totality of the story of these lands. None of us, especially not with colonization going on. So the more that we can do things like this, the more we can share and inform and raise awareness, and the more we can get back to how we should be, which is engaging with each other on a respectful and mutually beneficial platform and level. Once again, on behalf of the Providence Cultural Equity Initiative, on behalf of the Institute for Social Cohesion, on behalf of the Federation of Aboriginal Nations of the Americas, and on behalf of the Roger Williams University School of Law, American Indian Law Students Association, we do thank you for your time tonight. Chiefs, we thank you for the pleasure of your presence and your very wise words. And please be on the lookout in the near future. We will definitely be doing more of this, since it's such a pertinent conversation and pertinent field of discussion. Please do check out, I put links in there for the chiefs and their tribal communities and tribal nations. Check them out. I put the link in there for Professor Diamond. Please check out Roger Williams University School of Law. We've got fantastic federal Indian law classes going on. I believe next semester is on tribal government. A lot of good things taking place in the region up here and up and down the East Coast. I would say that right now, I think we have a really good argument to say that we could potentially be in the running for the heartbeat of Indian country right now. And that's with all due respect to all nations all across these fantastic lands that we now call the Americas. But once again, thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. And we will now call this panel discussion to a close. Wuni Nakan, have a great night. And Pish Kanash, we will see you all soon. Aho.
Ayutash.
Aho.